Imagine working day and night, building a future for yourself, only to be told that before you can use your hard-earned money, you must hand over half of it to someone else, without question, without choice. Now imagine this happening to entire nations, year after year, decade after decade. This is the harsh reality African countries have faced under the CFA franc system, a financial structure imposed by France that forces former colonies to deposit 50% of their foreign reserves in French banks. But it's not just numbers, it's gold. Billions of dollars worth of African gold locked away in foreign vaults, inaccessible to the very nations that mined it. For years, this system has ensured that Africa, despite its vast wealth, remains economically dependent. But that is beginning to change. A new wave of African leaders is rising, refusing to accept these colonial-era restrictions. Leading the charge is Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who alongside other bold leaders is demanding the return of Africa's stolen gold. This fight is more than just financial, it's a battle for sovereignty, freedom, and control over Africa's future. And the West is panicking. Will Africa finally reclaim its stolen wealth? Or will powerful nations fight to keep their grip on the continent? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we must first uncover how Africa's wealth was taken in the first place, and why those who challenge this system have always faced dangerous consequences. For decades, a carefully crafted financial system has ensured that African nations remain weak and dependent, despite sitting on vast natural wealth. At the heart of this system is the CFA franc, a currency imposed by France on its former colonies. Under this arrangement, these African nations are forced to deposit at least half of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. This means that even though these countries generate wealth, they cannot fully use their own money without French approval. The justification? France claims this guarantees economic stability. The reality? It ensures that France remains rich while Africa remains poor. But that's only the beginning. Institutions like the IMF and the World Bank have trapped African nations in another financial stranglehold, the cycle of debt. These organizations offer loans that come with conditions. In exchange for financial assistance, African nations must store their gold reserves in foreign banks, particularly in the US. They were told this was temporary, that once their economies improved, they would get their gold back. That never happened. Instead, legal and bureaucratic loopholes ensured that Africa's wealth remained in Western hands, while African nations continued borrowing, struggling, and sinking deeper into economic dependence. Over the years, a few brave leaders have recognized this financial enslavement and have tried to fight back. But history has shown that whenever an African leader dares to challenge Western financial control, they are silenced permanently. One of the first leaders to push back against this system was Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary president of Burkina Faso in the 1980s. Sankara saw the injustice of the CFA franc system and knew that Burkina Faso could never be free as long as it remained financially dependent on France. So, he made a bold move. He rejected IMF loans that would trap his country in debt. He demanded the return of Burkina Faso's gold reserves. He encouraged self-sufficiency, urging African nations to stop relying on Western aid and build their own economies. But his defiance came at a cost. In 1987, Sankara was assassinated in a coup led by Blaise Compaoré, a leader backed by France. The moment Compaoré took power, all of Sankara's reforms were reversed, and Burkina Faso fell back into Western control. In the early 2000s, Laurent Gbagbo, the president of Côte d'Ivoire, began questioning why an independent nation had to store its gold in France. He pushed for economic independence and sought to reclaim his country's resources. France didn't like that. In 2011, French troops, backed by the United Nations, intervened in Côte d'Ivoire's elections. Gbagbo was arrested and sent to the International Criminal Court, effectively removing him from power. His successor, a pro-French leader, ensured that Côte d'Ivoire remained under Western financial influence. For years, the message was clear. Any African leader who tries to break free will be eliminated. But today, that message is being challenged. A new generation of African leaders is rising. Leaders who refuse to bow to foreign control, who are determined to reclaim their nation's wealth and sovereignty. At the forefront of this movement is Ibrahim Traoré, the young and fearless president of Burkina Faso. Since coming to power in 2022, Traoré has made it clear that his country will no longer be a pawn in the West's financial system. Unlike past leaders who tried to negotiate within the framework imposed by former colonial powers, Traoré is tearing that framework apart. One of his first decisive actions was expelling French troops from Burkina Faso, marking an end to decades of military presence that allowed France to maintain influence over the country's internal affairs. But removing foreign troops was just the beginning. Traoré also terminated long-standing economic agreements that kept Burkina Faso dependent on France, ensuring that his country could begin to take control of its own financial policies. However, his boldest and most significant move has been his demand for the return of Burkina Faso's gold reserves, which have long been stored in European vaults, out of reach of the nation that rightfully owns them. But Traoré is not standing alone in this fight. His actions have inspired a broader movement across West Africa, and other leaders are following his example. In Mali, Assimi Goïta has taken similar steps, cutting ties with French military forces and working to dismantle economic policies that kept his country financially dependent on the West. Niger's Abdourahmane Tiani has also joined the movement, rejecting Western economic pressure and standing firm against financial blackmail designed to keep his country under foreign control. What began as a single leader taking a stand has now become a regional revolution, and it is gaining momentum at a pace the West never anticipated. This is not just about Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger. This is a movement that threatens to reshape the entire economic structure of Africa. And what makes it even more powerful is that it is not happening in isolation. Global powers are watching, and some are actively supporting Africa's push for economic independence. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has shown strong interest in strengthening economic ties with Africa, offering an alternative to the Western-controlled financial system. As African nations begin pulling their reserves from Western banks and exploring gold-backed financial systems, the possibility of an independent African economy free from foreign domination is becoming a reality. The West is panicking. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are not just challenging an outdated system, they are dismantling it. And if their movement succeeds, it could set off a domino effect across the continent, leading to the greatest economic shift Africa has seen in modern history. The question now is, how far will the West go to stop this revolution before it changes the balance of global power forever? For decades, Africa's financial future was dictated by institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, Western-controlled organizations that claimed to offer economic stability, but in reality, kept African nations trapped in debt and dependency. But now, a new force is rising, one that threatens to shake the very foundations of global finance. That force is BRICS, an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Unlike the Western institutions that have long exploited Africa's resources, BRICS is offering an alternative, one that prioritizes economic sovereignty and independence. African nations are seizing this opportunity and making bold moves toward financial freedom. Many are shifting away from outdated financial structures, working toward gold-backed currencies that would break their reliance on the West. Others are withdrawing their reserves from Western banks, ensuring that their gold, long stored in foreign vaults, finally returns home. Perhaps most significantly, Africa is now joining the global push to challenge the dominance of the US dollar, a currency that has controlled international trade for decades. If Africa embraces a BRICS-backed financial system, it could reshape the balance of global power, creating an economic order where African nations are no longer at the mercy of foreign interests. The question now is how far the West will go to stop this shift before it dismantles their financial control over the continent. For the first time in modern history, Africa is taking back control of its wealth, but the West will not let go without a fight. Will these leaders succeed where others failed? Or will history repeat itself? The battle for Africa's gold has just begun. As Africa takes decisive steps toward financial independence, France and the United States are in full-blown panic mode. The economic leverage they have maintained over the continent for decades is beginning to crumble, and with it, their control over Africa's vast resources. For years, Western nations have used financial dependency as a weapon, ensuring that African economies remain tied to institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. They dictated policies, controlled reserves, and benefited immensely from Africa's natural wealth, all while keeping the continent economically weak. But now that system is being challenged like never before, and history tells us exactly how the West responds when its grip on Africa is threatened. When economic pressure fails, the next phase of retaliation begins: sanctions, financial blackmail, and political interference. Already, Western powers have started cutting economic aid to countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, hoping to create financial turmoil and force them back into submission. But these nations are not backing down. Then comes the media war. Western news outlets have begun painting African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré and Assimi Goïta as dangerous dictators, framing their actions as reckless rather than revolutionary. The same playbook has been used before. Leaders who challenge Western economic dominance are quickly labeled as threats to democracy, giving justification for deeper political interference. But the most dangerous retaliation isn't just economic or political, it's military. Throughout history, whenever an African leader tried to reclaim national wealth and financial sovereignty, foreign-backed coups and interventions mysteriously followed. Thomas Sankara demanded financial freedom. He was assassinated. Laurent Gbagbo questioned French control. French troops removed him from power. Muammar Gaddafi attempted to create a gold-backed African currency. He was overthrown and brutally executed. Now the fear is that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could be next. The West has a long history of engineering coups in Africa, often using local political instability as an excuse for intervention. With the rise of these new independent-minded African leaders, the question is, will the West attempt another coup to maintain its financial grip? The battle for Africa's gold isn't just about money, it's about power, control, and the future of an entire continent. What is happening in Africa right now is not just a regional shift, it is a global realignment of power. The world is watching as African nations make historic moves to reclaim their gold, reject Western-controlled financial systems, and forge a path toward economic sovereignty. If they succeed, the impact will extend far beyond Africa's borders. It could fundamentally reshape the global economy. For decades, the US dollar and the euro have dominated international trade, serving as the world's reserve currencies. Nations trade in dollars, debts are paid in dollars, and the financial stability of many economies is directly tied to the value of the dollar. This system has allowed Western powers to dictate the rules of global finance, controlling everything from interest rates to economic policies in developing nations. But now, Africa is pushing back. One of the biggest fears for Western powers is that Africa will move toward a gold-backed financial system, breaking free from their control and challenging the dominance of the dollar and the euro. If Africa embraces a gold-backed currency, it could spark a global financial revolution, undermining Western influence and shifting economic power toward emerging markets. And it's already happening. In Nigeria, leaders have begun withdrawing gold reserves from Western banks, preparing for a future where their economy is no longer tied to the US dollar. In Ghana, the government is prioritizing keeping its gold reserves within the country, reducing reliance on foreign-controlled institutions like the IMF. Meanwhile, South Africa, a key member of BRICS, has been steadily increasing its gold reserves, signaling a long-term move away from Western financial systems. The message is clear. Africa is preparing for financial independence. And it's not just Africa. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has been actively developing alternatives to the US dollar. If African nations formally align with BRICS and adopt a gold-backed financial system, it could severely weaken the dominance of Western financial institutions, breaking the economic chains that have kept Africa under foreign control for decades. This is why France and the United States are panicking. They know that if Africa successfully reclaims its gold and establishes its own economic framework, Western economic dominance will never be the same again. The question now is, will the West allow this transformation to happen without a fight? Or will they use every tool at their disposal, economic sanctions, political interference, and even military intervention to stop Africa from rising? One thing is certain, the battle for Africa's financial independence is only just beginning. The battle for Africa's gold is one of the most important struggles of the 21st century. It is about more than money. It is about sovereignty, dignity, and the right of African nations to control their own wealth. For too long, the continent has been trapped in a cycle of financial dependency, its wealth stored in foreign vaults while its people remain in poverty. But now, a new generation of leaders is standing up. Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, Abdourahmane Tiani, and others are making history by challenging the financial system that has held Africa back for so long. The stakes couldn't be higher. Will Africa finally reclaim its stolen wealth and build a future free from foreign control? Or will powerful nations do everything in their power to crush this movement before it succeeds? And more importantly, should all African nations rise up and demand their gold back? The world is watching. What happens next could change history forever. What do you think? Should Africa take full control of its gold and financial future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.